I want to start by just offering a shout out to Derek Bach, who in many ways is the father of this effort. And has had a tremendous influence not just on Harvard, but on higher education in the learning and teaching area. I also just want to say a word from the perspective of the governing boards, of which I served for a number of years. They have shown a great deal of interest in this topic and are anxious to support this effort and interested in learning more about it. And we pursued this both through presentations at the corporation meetings by some of you and some deans and the provost, and also through more informal dinners with people who are participating in this effort. We're here because institutions are both responding to a problem, namely the need to better engage students who now have significant claims on their attention and have readily accessible alternative sources of knowledge and information. And we're trying to take advantage of the opportunities that have been created by new technologies and new knowledge about how people learn. Lots of questions arise at the institutional level, such as, is this a problem or an opportunity that primarily is associated with large research organizations, or is this more generally a problem spread across higher education, big and small? Is it a problem and an opportunity that is focused in the liberal arts or in sciences as well? Is it afflicting professional schools and graduate schools? Is there greater opportunity in some disciplines than in others? While all of our panelists here have significant responsibilities for managing educational reform, they each have a different perspective. Jim's responsibilities are to a professional school, one that trains teachers, researchers, educational leaders, and therefore he has to adapt his teaching to a very rapidly changing K through 12 environment. Clayton leads a smaller liberal arts college where premium is put on small class size, on close relationships between students and faculty, and where educational and financial resources are more limited. Is the same kind of challenge facing Harvard, facing Bates, and other organizations like that. HUNT is operating in a highly competitive online and extension studies market where change is happening at a whirlwind pace, and he has to adapt virtually every day. And finally, Peter faces the challenge of trying to ensure that Harvard X and edX adopt practices that have some evidence-based support behind them, and that the initiative serves both residential students and those who are learning at a distance. I want to pose to each of them, starting with Jim, then going to Clayton, Hunt, and Peter, the question of, from their perspectives, their individual perspectives, what are the problems and the opportunities that they observe?
Thanks, and thanks to all of you for being here. I'm delighted to be here. As the dean of an ed school, I tend to think of this topic from three different perspectives. The first is the perspective of teachers at the K-12 level. And there, I think the problem is that we don't yet have enough capacity to take advantage of the opportunities that digital learning affords. We have not done enough in terms of pre-service or professional development to enable teachers to take advantage of the learning technologies that exist. And by this, I don't mean we need to teach teachers how to use an iPad. In some respects, it's more fundamental than that. Learning technologies allow for flipped classrooms. They allow, like the School of One, for individualized instruction that goes at the pace of the student, which in turn raise questions about the very role of teachers. So in some respects, it's about how to change teaching to adapt to technology, or to put yourself in a position to use technology to the advantage of yourself and to your students. And so I think that one of the things that we can do as an ed school is to focus on ways to build that capacity and to enable more teachers to use technology where appropriate, but also to understand its limitations. Digital learning and digital technologies are just a tool. They're not a substitute for teaching, but they can change the way we think about teaching. We have one professional development course online about teaching with technology, but I think that we ought to be doing more. From the perspective of K-12 students, and this I think in turn has some impact on colleges and universities, and I think about their experience and how that will translate into what they expect when they come to college or universities. There is a trend, nascent perhaps, but there's a trend towards more engagement in K-12 education, more hands-on learning, more project-based learning. Some of this is fueled by learning technologies, some of it is independent of it. But either way, there are more opportunities for students to be engaged in their own learning. To the extent that this continues, and to the extent that students become more and more themselves familiar with and comfortable with technology, it seems to me that they are not going to expect that their college or university learning occur mostly in a large lecture hall, and that they're going to be looking for other opportunities and other ways to learn. And I'm not sure that colleges and universities are fully prepared for that eventual reality. I know the theme of the conference is engagement and distance. And to me, the only distance that prevents engagement is emotional distance. I think all the other distances can be overcome. And I'm just not sure. I think it's hard at times to have that to overcome that emotional distance in a large lecture hall. The last perspective is from the perspective of a professional school. And there the question, which is common across universities and colleges and professional schools, is what should we be doing online? We have a number of professional development courses online. And in some respects, that's the easy part. The availability of online learning allows us to increase our reach in the professional development sphere. But to me, the harder questions are, should we be thinking about a hybrid degree or possibly even a fully online degree? In the world of education, this is a particularly attractive notion only because of the difficulty at times for, say, someone who is a teacher and wants to become a principal to leave his or her place of work, travel to Cambridge for a year, only to go back to become a principal. So I think that there is a real need for this and a market for this, but doing this right is obviously the challenge. And if you're talking about any kind of teacher preparation or principal preparation, there's also an in-field component, and so technology and online learning can't obviously do all of it. So that is something that is high on our agenda this year, is trying to figure out whether and how we might be able to do something more than just professional development and think about an actual hybrid program.
Clayton?
So everything that's being discussed today is an enormous opportunity for liberal arts colleges like Bates or Williams or Amherst. Pick your favorite one and keep it in your mind. It's also potentially an existential threat, because for us, the sleeping giant of the R1, the Research One University, has just woken up and gotten interested in what we thought we did best, which is teaching. And the Harvards, the Stanfords, the MITs of the world are bringing a great many more resources, much higher access to brain science, the science of teaching and learning, much stronger brands in a worldwide market. They're bringing to the world we thought we owned, the world of teaching, everything they've got. So how do we think about this? So I would say in the old days, a really bright student might choose a Williams and Amherst, a Bates, a Colby, a Bowdoin over a Harvard, a Yale, a Stanford, and that would be a rational choice for a student to make, and it would be a choice in a sense of experience over brand. You would be saying, I know I could go get that fancy Harvard degree, but I'm going to have a better experience if I go to Bates because I'm going to be in the classroom having that charismatic encounter with a fabulous teacher. They're going to know me. I'm going to learn critical thinking, creative thinking, all of those things firsthand, and somebody's going to actually care that I'm there. And conversely, Harvard, triumph of brand over experience. Well, now what's happening in the old days, or in the stylized universe. Now what's happening is, and the liberal arts colleges have gotten pretty lazy about saying small is good. Our teaching is best because it's small, it's intimate, it's human scale. Well, guess what? We've seen today the many ways in which large can be very good, very powerful, and very beautiful. We've seen today that the human factor can be projected in very powerful ways around the globe, and people can have fabulously engaged and effective learning experiences. So unless we get over ourselves in the liberal arts and get moving and start running toward and embracing the kinds of exciting phenomena we're talking about in this room, we're in a heap of trouble because we have lost our distinctive market niche. Now, I think this is a huge opportunity because once you think about things like the universality of content, it used to be that if you were at Harvard, you could do a thesis on Emily Dickinson, spend every day in the Schlesinger Library, have full access to her papers. And if you're at Bates, you could send in a ticket for interlibrary loan and get the wrong book in 3 weeks, okay? Now, at Bates, you've got full access to those papers of Emily Dickinson, and guess what? You're working with the chairman of the English department on your thesis. So we have enormous advantages of scale if we think creatively about the possibilities of universal content, blended learning. And we've got the highest ratios of highly trained adults to students of any educational model. So I think this is very exciting. Also, if you think about just the noise that's out there, some of the kinds of things Malia was talking about earlier today, the noise, the degree to which we actually need to be thoughtful about norms of how we spend our time, how we think about things, how we learn to get meaning out of chaos. Again, I think we, as in an idealized form, a living learning community, have a very powerful opportunity to do that. So I will close there for the moment. We'll come back to some of the challenges for actually pulling that off, but I think it's a very exciting time. And we've got a lot of interest on the Bates campus in embracing this.
Thank you. Distance engagement. What does that mean to me, and concerns and opportunities? Every concern I've ever had, I've seen as an opportunity. But I want to talk a little bit about the unique piece of the learner market that we serve. So this past year, I've taken a look at our student base through the extension school, summer school, and professional programs. Our youngest student was 12. Our oldest student was 90. The average student was 34. They enrolled in over 1,000 different courses over the course of a year, which we assemble into 3 clusters of degrees with 48 various fields of study. Diversity is a huge challenge. Age diversity, ethnicity, 117 different countries, almost 30% of our total students coming from overseas. And so when we talk about closing the distance gap, it's the diversity of the student we get, as well as the physical distance between us and them. So we spend an enormous amount of time working with faculty, saying, what does it mean to close that gap, to make it engaging, relevant, and close? Because this is Harvard, and it is about being close. And we spend a lot of time trying to engineer that. When I wake up in the morning, what I worry about are the 20 to 30 million Americans that have been left behind in the cycle of changing economic structures. We all have read the history and understand how this country moved from an agrarian to an industrial economy. We are in some sort of a flux now, moving from a fundamentally industrial economy to a knowledge or information economy, where knowledge and information are changing the industrial and agricultural economy. In that transition, huge numbers of people are left behind in the workforce. Who's going to educate them in a way where they can be productive members of this knowledge future? And that's what I see the Extension School doing. Harvard has the assets in its faculty and its knowledge and its relationships. And it's our responsibility to figure out how we package it. So across that age group, across that diversity, we get at those 20 million in America. And guess what? There's another 2 billion globally in exactly the same place. Harvard can only serve a tiny fraction of those students. But if we can set a standard for doing it, if we can be the innovators, if we can document what works and how it works, then I look to see all the great public universities around the world copy us and catch up. For those of you who don't know, we're open access. Anybody can take any of our courses. Our admissions to our degrees is earn your way in, be or better in 3 courses in each specified degree. And you can do an entire undergraduate degree for $40,000 and most master's degrees for under $25,000. So we've got a value proposition for this adult part-time learner, which is how we describe who we serve, that is extraordinary. And then we have a very, very strong niche in high school and college part-time learners who come to us in the summer. And we see just enormous upside in that market. We think it's an enormous market, and it's full of the minds that we're interested in. The adult part-time learner and the high school and college student who can do Harvard-level rigor work. They have the intelligence and the work ethic to do it, but can't otherwise come and live at Harvard. Because coming and living at Harvard is the best you can do. But this 20 million and this 2 billion can't do that for one reason or another. And so my great opportunity is to figure out how we serve more of them better.
Peter.
So I think we face, in some sense, thinking about residential education now, a perfect storm of problems and a perfect storm of opportunities. Based on largely anecdotal evidence at the moment, but there's some empirical evidence to support this as well from various places. We've seen a decline in rigorous note-taking in classes. And I see people nodding their heads yes to that. And you know, if you're not taking notes during a lecture, then you're not retaining very much. And I accept as the general finding that after 6 to 8 minutes, your retention rates go down. So the decline in note-taking is a sign of less retention in a lecture. We see, and you've just seen some data on that, increasingly poor attendance rates in many courses. And we see a sharp decline over the last 15 to 20 years in the amount of time students spend working on a class outside of class. There are some very important exceptions to this. David Malin's CS50, 700 students, right? Looks simple when you begin, but by the end of the term, you're in for 25 to 30 hours a week of work. This is, I think, a wonderful thing. It's some level, but of course, it's at the expense of other things. So if students are spending less time in class, taking fewer notes that they can review, doing less work outside of class, they must be doing something else because they're not sleeping anymore. So they're making a judgment about the value of class. Now, that's the world we live in. And so the question is, how are we going to cope with this world? I think that's where I get to we face a perfect set of opportunities as well. Over the past 3 years, the amount of interest from this faculty, academic staff, professional staff, in teaching and learning has steadily increased. It's been an extraordinary thing. Remember that we have 106, this is a number I got from Aaron Driver-Lim a while ago, but 165 people across the university, academic professionals, who are concerned with supporting teaching and learning. We have a network there, and we've actually started to knit it together in the Teaching and Learning Consortium, in the Learning Support Network, to try to work together across lines of departments and faculties to see what we can do to improve the quality of teaching and learning. We have, through Harvard and MIT, we've made this tremendous investment in edX. And we're making an investment in HarvardX to the tune of around 40 new learning experiences a year. Those things, when faculty come in and say, I want to do a HarvardX course, they're coming in, and one of the questions they're asked is, how are you going to use this to improve teaching and learning in your residential course? It's true, HarvardX courses are massive and open and online, and unfortunately still free. But the free is not a long-range plan, right? In my view. But we are concerned is not only how we can reach the world and improve learning and education across the world. 70% of the 1.4 million who sign up for HarvardX courses are abroad. 70% are post-BA. Keep those 70-70 figures in mind, really. And we'll see if that changes, but it seems to be true generally in online learning in this sort of massive open world. How do we bring this to bear on residential education? We bring it to bear through blended learning, but blended learning does not necessarily go over easily. 7 years ago, when MIT began to use blended learning, there were student protests, petitions, letters. They did not like it. And the reason they didn't like it was very, very simple. It meant they had to go to class. Which means that they were used to manners of assessment which didn't require that you go to class. And as long as, if we expect people to show up in a room, whether it's for a discussion or interactive work, or even for a lecture, and if there is no need, if there's no way, from a student's perspective, it doesn't really matter to the outcomes that they want, the credits, the grades, right? Then why do we expect them to be there? One of the questions we could ask is, if students are skipping lecture, if they're looking for more effective ways of information transfer, do we have them? We do. We have issues of adaptive learning. We have all sorts of ways in which we can approach the problem of better transfer information so we can spend our time more on the synthetic aspects and analytic aspects of thinking in the classroom. So HarvardX, under Rob Liu's leadership, and Samantha, Rob, you're here, and Samantha Earp, I think, is here as well, the executive director. These people are working to create this material, this online material. Extraordinary work, too, by all accounts. The response of students is just absolutely great to it. But we're also doing something else. We're trying to create a unified research organization for teaching and learning that will serve both online learning and the development of online courses, but also the development of residential courses. And the goal of that online learning, or that research organization, is to translate research into practice. Well, how do we translate it into practice and get that information out and put into practice here at Harvard? Right? That's all those 165 people who are concerned with the academic professionals for support for teaching and learning, but also all of you who are teaching as well. That's our perfect opportunity. And I think that this is the year we have the resources, we have the people, we have the interest. This is the year perhaps we can begin to move aggressively forward.
Thank you. As I was listening to Sam earlier and Peter now, I was thinking about what an outlier I must have been or how times have changed. I think if I missed 5 classes in 4 years, it was probably because I was sick. And I took copious notes, which I have carted around the United States until my daughter, 20 years out of college, my wife finally said, I'm going to throw all her notes out. What can I do with your Harvard notebook? She was a classmate. She didn't take copious notes. Anyway, as Peter points out, when you don't have to take notes and you don't have to attend classes and the median grade is A, is there a
I
mystery?
didn't mention that.
Oh, excuse me. Maybe this is like the Harvard Business School X, that we don't mention the cost. Anyway, some of these problems I don't think are as mysterious as they're being made out to be. As David said in the first session, positive institutional change is always difficult, but change is especially hard at large, complex, decentralized institutions like Harvard. And furthermore, resources are scarce, and here I'm not talking about financial resources only, but more to the point, time of faculty, time of administrators, deans, provosts, and so on. And this raises a lot of questions that leaders like our panelists have to grapple with. And the first of those is sort of how should the university or a college in Clayton's sense, or a department, decide how fast and how far to travel down this educational innovation highway. Should we let 1,000 flowers bloom? Let the pace be determined by the interest of the faculty with no constraints except maybe the physical constraints of certain facilities. If we're going to tap on the brakes, who should do the tapping? Should it be department chairs? Should it be deans? Should it be the provost's office? Or alternatively, we think, wait, this is going too slowly. We really need to keep the engines moving. Who's responsible for doing that? How much coordination should there be across different units of a complex institution like Harvard? To what extent does one size fit all? Or is this very peculiar to this department, that school, whatever? How important do you think it is for Harvard to be at the forefront of this movement? There's a lot of instances in which those who lead the charge end up in the grave, and it's really the second, third innovators who have learned the lessons of failure that do it successfully. Is this essential to our prestige? Let me turn and ask the panelists in the same order to have a few words on what they see as the primary enablers and barriers to positive organizational change at Harvard, and to guiding, encouraging, and moderating the organizational change that's necessary to move this forward in a constructive way. Jim?
So that's a big question. I think I'll just start by giving my perspective on the university in relation to the schools. It may be because I taught constitutional law in a prior life that I tend to think of Harvard as a federalist system. And I don't mean that pejoratively, just descriptively. But, and by that I mean I think about the center like the federal government and the constituent parts like the states. And so in thinking about this topic of online learning, I think, okay, well, what does the centralized portion of the university do well, and what do the constituent parts do well? And I think if you're looking for economies of scale and coordination, you would give responsibility to the central part of the university. If you're looking for experimentation, you would let 1,000 flowers bloom. And I think the current approach hits that about right, insofar as Harvard X is producing or hopes to produce about 40 very high quality courses a year, mostly MOOCs. And I think taking advantage of the economies of scale offered through the production capacity that Harvard has makes absolute good sense. But if you're thinking about doing more, if you're thinking about creating a program, or you're thinking about creating a certificate, a sequence of courses that will result in a certificate, in my view, we don't yet know enough to be able to centralize that aspect of online learning. And there, I think, it makes every good sense to allow the different schools to experiment with different platforms, with different programs, with different revenue models, with different approaches to whether to give credit or not, which is essentially how it's unfolding, and I think that makes perfect sense. From my perspective about the ed school itself, I think we have already produced online courses. In fact, we've had online courses for over a decade. And I think the next step in the evolution of this is to be intentional about what we are doing and to think about how does online programming fit with our own priorities, which in turn can then organize which courses you encourage, which courses you might allow on an experimental basis, which faculty you would want to tap to produce courses. The barriers, obviously, or some of the challenges are how to think about producing an online course when it comes to faculty compensation or faculty time, or to think about IP issues and the like. But I don't think that those challenges are at all insurmountable. And in terms of whether Harvard ought to be a leader in this, my view, and this is from the view of the ed school perhaps, is I think it's less important to be, first than it is to be right. And by that I mean I would like the ed school, at least, to be a leader in linking research to practice, and that is linking what we know about how students learn to what we are doing online, so that what we do online is in sync with what we know about how students learn. And that's where I think we ought to be a leader.
So having spent 15 years here in the central administration before going to a much smaller institution, I realized there are very different theories of change at those different kinds of organizations. So I always saw the size and complexity of Harvard and its federalist system as creating a tremendous amount of white space. So you just had to grab the ball and run down that white space while somebody else was focused elsewhere. And it was easy in that sense to get a lot done. So if Harvard's the ocean liner with lots of white space, a place like Bates is a little more like a Boston whaler. It's easier to turn it in a different direction in principle, but everybody in that Boston whaler expects to have a role in which direction we go. So change becomes very complicated in a different way. There's not the same amount of white space, but there's a greater ability to reach the more unified whole directly and work on things. So over the past couple of years since I've been there, to Jim's point, we have just been focused on trying to create a culture of experimentation in teaching. I always begin with coalitions of the willing and getting the party going and having everybody else want to opt in. I'm not going to spend my time, my ideas, my leadership time, my persuasive abilities, however limited, trying to get the last holdout on board. Let's just create a structure of experimentation, get the party going. And then the other thing at a place like Bates or any liberal arts college, we have high teaching loads. People everywhere are very busy. We all have the same time and financial resource constraints and expertise constraints. But so you have to build in the experimentation into the existing incentive and workload structures. So, for example, we have a short term at the end of our 2 regular semesters at Bates that runs from mid-April to the end of May, 5 weeks, and that would be normally the January term at a lot of other places. So in order to get some experimentation, attention to pedagogy going, we said this past year, a faculty member can get up to 5 or 6 students and redesign a course that they'd like to redesign for the regular curriculum. And that faculty member will get their teaching credit for short term, and the students get their learning credit for short term. And normally you have to teach a class of 20, just given our economics, in the short term. And we said, we'll free up those resources to let you pick 5 students to work with. And so we had more than 5 want to sign up, 5 courses ran, a neuroscientist wanting to get more computational methods in, statistics wanting to redesign so that it wouldn't be torture and have kids coming into office hours in tears all the time, you name it, digital innovation. So we ran that set of courses, and there's now huge interest because it's within the teaching load and available sort of time and resource slot that's available. Our biggest barrier to change is, frankly, capacity in terms of expertise. I mean, Peter, you said you are building here a unified research organization for teaching and learning that is going to translate everything we're learning into practice. And our biggest difficulty at a place like Bates or in the liberal arts as a sector is getting access to that expertise. So nothing would thrill me more than to figure out a way to have the Harvard X's of the world run boot camps for the Williams Amherst Bateses of the world. Because I feel like the next step, we've gotten very excited about the way we're democratizing knowledge and the learning experience for students globally, and I would love to democratize the faculty development dimension of what is going on here.
Great. All right, I'll go back in time just a little bit to 104 years ago. And 104 years ago, President Lowell founded the Extension School, and he brought in some of the ideas from the Lowell Institute, pricing a course at the cost of 2 bushels of wheat. But the key insight was Harvard should be making its faculty and its knowledge available to the local community of Cambridge and Boston. And for 104 years, that's what we did. And there were 2 surprises. One, that Harvard would do it at all. The second surprise really was the fact that the faculty loved it and kept coming back. Because faculty found that the opportunity to teach professionals with 10, 20 years of experience was a robust connection to the community and what was going on in the world that helped them in their teaching. What's happened since is simply an extrapolation of that and where the market is gone. So if you look at the market, in those days, the market was entirely young students and occasional adult learners. Today in higher ed in this country, 73% of all students are adult part-time learners. So the disruption Clayton Christian talks about in his book, I argue, has already happened. It's done. The University of Phoenix's, the Kaplans, the others came in and disrupted education by serving the market that wasn't served. And what's actually happening now in the market is the Harvards and other credible providers are now offering high-quality education to that market at a lower price than the University of Phoenix does. And our ability to take faculty and put them in an environment where they love teaching an adult part-time learner is our core competence. When we look at Harvard, we think about the real estate industry. Everybody knows in real estate, it's location, 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 3 laws. The beauty of higher ed, it's faculty, faculty, faculty. And if we start every day saying it's faculty, 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 and knowing that our purpose in the world is to make that faculty and their knowledge available to adult part-time learners, our job actually becomes pretty simple. Our great enabler is how do we package it? How many forms? With what credentials? To what specific audience? And if you think about how that's come together at Harvard in a way to enable our faculty to engage more, you think of 125 Mount Auburn. How many people here have been to 125 Mount Auburn or even know what it is? Okay, fair number. Yeah. Inside 125 Mount Auburn is a secret lair, I call it. And I thought about this a year ago and started trying to articulate it, and then it organically happened because a lot of us were thinking the same way. So on the 3rd floor of 125 Mount Auburn, David Malin has his CS50 innovation space. It's truly a secret lair. If you went over there, you wouldn't believe it's Harvard. It's polished concrete floors, cables hanging from the ceiling, all glass walls, 4K cameras, tons of students, tons of graduate students, equipment, playing, inventing how we do online education for the future. If you go up 1 floor from him, you hit the entire Harvard X enterprise and all of the resources they've brought to bear to help faculty create MOOCs. If you go to the floor above that, we have the Derek Bach Center, part of it, that is supporting Harvard X. We have the TLT group, which is implementing Canvas and the learning analytics engine for Harvard. We have our software development group for the Extension School, platform operating group, and distance course development and production group. So in one building, You've got the capacity to engage faculty, help faculty figure out what audience they're putting their material together for, package it for that audience, deliver it for that audience, be it the same course on campus with edX, HarvardX, flipped classroom components for free over edX, hopefully someday for money over edX, or through us in the extension school as a 4-credit course off the same platform with all the student services and sectioning and 20 students per TA. And what I see as the enabler at Harvard is we've simultaneously been willing to invest in creating that body of stimulus for faculty without violating what I think is a core rule of innovation from the earlier discussion, and that's that innovation happens at the edge. If you want to innovate, you better be at the interface between the provider and the consumer. And that interface is where faculty touch students. And so we must have innovation going on all over Harvard where faculty touch students. And we must have a federalist system that allows the best practices from that innovation to become a central knowledge that we can share through HarvardX, through the extension school, through these other mechanisms. So I think Harvard is extremely well positioned to enable us to respond to what's going on from market forces, technology forces, public policy forces that are affecting how education gets delivered and the demanded cost. And so I think we're in a really good place with our set of enablers.
And 125 Mount Auburn Street, which if you haven't been there, we hope you all will go there. HILT is there. The HILT postdoctoral fellows, the researchers are there. The research organization will be built there. I've always dreamed that we should have a one-stop shop. Right? One place where any person could go and say, I'm interested in this about teaching and learning, I need help in this or that, and you could find it there, or you could be pointed in the right direction there. Proximity counts, and I think particularly for the academic professionals that are employed, giving them the chance to be with each other, to rotate through from the different schools, to learn from what other people are doing in HarvardX, in DCE, in HILT, this would be tremendously valuable. And so, Alan, I guess I should direct this to you. Could you add a couple more floors to that building and give us some more space? We could do that. I want sort of the problems we face. I think that there's a tension between innovation and production. To make HarvardX successful within the budget we have, it has to be focused on production. If you're going to do production, you're going to have a limited set of possibilities, and you say, you come in, you fit in this slot or that slot. But we need constant innovation. So one of the things we need to do is the part of the Box Center that is there and the people from the Learning and Teaching Network around Harvard who will spend time at 125 Mount Auburn is to really work with courses to think about what are new possibilities, things that we haven't thought of, things that are not part of the production process yet, but which can allow us to do things, new things, and then figure out how do we translate that into production. The second is the tension between free and sustainability. Free doesn't sustain, right? Although we are collecting their buckets outside and you can drop your dollars in as we go. But I think we do have to get to the point that we educate the public, and it's a very large public, that a little bit from a lot of people makes education more affordable for everybody. I don't think we're there yet, but we will have to move there. And I think we should do it in an open and transparent way rather than trying to do all sorts of marketing schemes where you try to get people to pay more later and stuff like that. There's a tension between content and form. I teach Chinese history, but I also teach it. But if I'm a good teacher, it's by accident, because what I really want to be is a good historian. And if I'm going to if I have a choice between having a conversation about Chinese history or a conversation about how I teach, I think I want to have the conversation about Chinese history, to be honest with you. Right? So how do we, and I think that's true for most of our faculty, that we're here because, let me not say not because of our teaching. We value teaching. We value teaching, and we actually really do. But no, we really do. And, I mean, it's part of the tenure review process, and I've seen this again and again, that teaching does matter. But that we need to figure out how to make the discussion of the medium by which we help students master content and research skills that are necessary for that, and learn about China's history and so on, how to make it more convenient for teachers who are really focused on their work to be good teachers, and for the students to be good students. I don't think we should leave them out of the equation. It's not just a supply side thing, right? We also have to look at the audience for this. There's another challenge for us between creating knowledge and transmitting knowledge, right? As Su Shi said in the 11th century, there's a plug for Chinese literature now. There are people who create knowledge, he said, and there are people who transmit knowledge. It's really easy for people to come and do something, a piece of research that's been done by others before, and to say, aha, I've created this. It's really difficult to have systems in place where we transmit knowledge to people who can use it. And this, it's true in every field, right? If you go to Longwood and talk to the medical school and say, how are you at transmitting medical research to clinicians? They say, we're lousy at it, right? We're just as bad at translating research on teaching and learning to teachers. We got to figure out how to do this, do a better job of this. We will.
Peter, for your comments on teaching, there's an exit behind the screen. You can avoid the angry mob out there. Malia pointed out that student engagement has eroded in part because of the distractions of digital technology in the classroom, where students can now access the outside world or communicate privately with others in the lecture hall through their laptops, iPads, smartphones, etc. As with the person in charge of Yahoo for the Western Hemisphere the other day, and he said their data shows that the average millennial, a little older than the students, interacts with their digital technology on average 150 times a day. I threw this number out to a group of my younger colleagues in Washington, and they thought it was way too low. So the question, and I've been in some classrooms standing at the back where I've seen Lands In, Google, various things on the laptop computers, and it raises the question in my mind that should we leave it in a sense to the individual professor to set the rules on use of digital technology in large lecture halls? Should we put in the course guide little symbols that say which classes you aren't allowed to access your digital technology? Should we hope for some technological development the way Larry Lessig was asking for, to provide self-control for him while he's on his computer that would automatically disable these kinds of digital technologies within certain spatial environments? Or is this something that we just let it continue the way it does and let whatever faculty want to curb it take on the onus themselves? I'll start with Peter and go down this way.
Okay, I wasn't expecting.
No, I didn't.
Good. Yeah,
No.
I think it's important to keep in mind that there are many more students than there are faculty. They outnumber us, right? They bring their culture to us, right? And so one of the negotiations that take place in college, I think, is how do we, and these people, of course, go on to professional school as well, how do we negotiate this relationship between us and them in such a way that they have a reason to be engaged? We can distance them, but they can distance us, right? I am not sure that, I actually teach a course where we, because it's blended learning, because it's discussion, we actually say no laptops, no mobile devices and things like this. And it is constant discussion. It's very, very, because students are prepared, because they have to be prepared, because they get assessed on whether they're prepared or not. Maybe we can do more things like that, but I think if we can't create something that's compelling enough and interactive enough for students to stay engaged, then they're going to go on Facebook, on LinkedIn. Well, that's LinkedIn, I guess, with students, but shopping, whatever. And that's the world.
Huh?
A thought, a definition that helps me when I deal with these issues that I learned in my entrepreneurial days. Invention, which is a lot of what higher ed does, is a process of spending money to create knowledge. Very important process, in fact, mostly delegated to higher ed now, not done much in private practice. Innovation is the process of spending knowledge to create money. And in that role, we're very much an innovator for Harvard. We are attempting to spend the knowledge of the faculty and spend the knowledge of a select set of delivery modes of information that accommodate our part-time learners, that blend together classroom, active mastery online, competency teaching models, lecture capture, in a way that leads to effective learning for those students given the definition of distance for them, which may be age, it may be distance, it may be cultural upbringing. But if we can be innovators for Harvard in how you take this incredible knowledge resource, package it for this part-time learner, be economically sustainable and contribute to Harvard, I think we will have created great value for the community here and around the world.
So Bob, to the extent your question was about how do we think about the use of machines and et cetera in the classroom, I think the question of creating the norms that will govern all of this is every bit as much of a substantive project as all of the kinds of stuff we're talking about today. And I think it's inevitably going to be a collective enterprise, and it's inevitably going to be a yeasty dialectic between top-down direction, experiments, initiatives, and bottom-up behavior of the students who outnumber us. But I think self-consciously taking on the values and normative dimensions of what we're talking about is very exciting. It's certainly very exciting in the context I'm working in, which is sort of set up ideally to tackle those questions.
Jim?
So my view is that this is something that ultimately should be left to faculty members. And I can see both sides of it. My view when I was a law professor, which was similar to Peter's, and I allowed students to have laptops and thought part of my challenge was to keep them engaged enough in the class that they would not be surfing the internet. And I did that by having an awful lot of discussion. Did some of them look online? I'm sure some of them did. But in a sense, I think Peter is right that if you're thinking about it in that way, you're thinking about what should we be doing in our classes to keep them engaged, whether they have a laptop or an iPhone or nothing. And so, I think this raises the issue in some ways of just how do you engage students during their time in class. That said, I had many colleagues at the ed school who simply banned laptops or iPhones. And I can understand that as well, because I bet I'm not the only one who has an addiction to looking at my iPhone. And if it's near me, even if I'm listening to something compelling, I will sneak a peek. And I've also experienced the liberation that comes when you're physically separated from a device. And I've seen it with my own kids, where we will say in the summers, hand in your phone at 9 a.m. and you can get it back at 9 p.m. And they grumble for the first hour, and then at 10 a.m. it's like the lights go on and they're looking around and they see the world for the first time. And so I can see that. I can see the wisdom of that approach as well. I mean, in some respects, restricting choices here may actually be doing students a favor.
You're all institutional leaders. The role of an institutional leader is to be positive and constructive during the day, but to worry at night, to have sleepless nights. And I want to know what keeps you awake in this space at night.
I never slept well anyway. So look, I think that one of the challenges is that this is an area in which there are lots and lots of people, and they have different perspectives. When you have different perspectives, you see your priorities are going to change, differ somewhat. Your concerns about what you can do versus what somebody else can do are going to be somewhat overlapping, but perhaps rivaling. And yet, I think one of the things we've all experienced is that if you take any random set of you and sit you down at a table and say, discuss this, you actually have a really interesting discussion. So how do we get people to learn from each other in ways that are productive? It doesn't, I worry about money too, but I mean, I think it's actually more important to worry about that.
I worry about quality, and I want to couch that carefully. What I've found over the years is if you put a group of great learners in a room, they will learn. You can have bad teachers, you can have bad materials, you can have bad almost anything, but great learners are curious and they will learn. Here at Harvard, we have an embarrassment of riches. We have great teachers, great knowledge, great teaching, and great learners, and they come together and magical things happen. But even here, we can't measure quality in a way we feel very good about based on the earlier discussion. We don't know what it is, we don't know how to quantify it, and if we knew how to quantify it, we don't know how to measure it and act on it in real time. So as we extend that to an audience that's much more diverse and much further distant, I really worry about how do we know we're achieving quality and how are we going to do that systematically. And I don't think we're good at it. I don't think we'll be very good at it soon, but we're going to keep trying.
So I worry about our preoccupation with scale because we are about small scale and about the magic that can happen when you have a very explicitly humanistic scale, the ability to tackle the whole person in community. And I worry a little that the world is moving so fast and the denominator is getting so large that getting through to people for whom the small, highly experiential model of education is getting through to people who don't understand that that's a powerful model. And that's basically a bunch of people whose ancestors have lived in New England for 300 years. That's increasingly difficult, and yet I think it is an enormously powerful model. We punch way above our weight in terms of the people we've graduated and their impact on the world and the efficacy of the core liberal arts education for having meaningful lives in an always changing world. So I think a lot about scale.
Jim.
So I'm not worried, I guess. I'm sorry to go against the grain. I just view this as an incredibly exciting moment filled with opportunity. And I think if you go into it knowing that you're not going to get it right the first time and that you're going to have to experiment and that you have faith that the enduring values and principles of residential education will continue and that the very best of education will continue, to me, there's only upside. I recognize that this is a disruptive time and that there's a lot of anxiety because of the uncertainty. But I think if you lower your expectations about getting it right immediately and think about constantly learning and constantly experimenting, there's every reason to be incredibly excited. I think we're at an unbelievable moment in the history of education, from pre-K all the way through higher education, and I'm delighted to be a part of it.
That's a great positive note to end this session on, and the next part of this meeting is to have Alan Garber, our provost, say a few words, but join me now in thanking the panel for their presentation.